I recently did a video of my reading journal flip through for 2021, but since I focused on the journaling and the setup and I didn't get to talk about the actual books that much, I thought I would make another video to talk about all the books I read in 2021 and just sum up my thoughts on them in just a few sentences. Since I already did a flip through of my journal, I thought I would do something a little different for this video. So I'll be doing some lettering of the titles of the books and some doodling. The first book I read was Race by Toni Morrison. This was a collection of excerpts of some of her novels as well as some short stories and essays. It was a nice glimpse into her work and definitely looking forward to reading some more of her work sometime. Next, I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This was such a lovely book. I laughed, I cried. It was just a really touching and heartwarming set of stories that take place in a small cafe in Tokyo where you can go back to the past and talk to the person you were there with, but you have to do it before the coffee gets cold. It takes you on people's journeys of regret, reconciliation, and closure, and it makes you think about the question of, if you could go back in time, who would you want to meet and would you change anything? Then I read my first Sally Rooney, Normal People. I liked the writing and the way life as people in their mid-20s was described, but I wasn't sure if I liked the feeling of melancholy and frustration that I constantly felt reading this. I've since also read Conversation with Friends, so more on that in a little bit. Next, I read Jazz. This was so beautifully written. It had so many layers, so much meaning in every sentence. I definitely need to reread before I move on to the rest of the series. I feel like maybe I read it too soon after my reading slump and I wasn't quite ready. So we'll get back to this one at some point. Then I read Turtles All the Way Down. This is such a comfort read for me. I thought John Green did an amazing job at describing how anxiety feels and manifests itself through the story of Asa Holmes. It was definitely painful to read at times, but it does so well at representing both young adult struggles in general and anxiety specifically. Definitely will read this again, and I would recommend you to do also. Next, I read Kim Jiyoung, Born 1982 by Cho Nam-jun. I loved every page of this short book. It combines fiction and facts through the story of Kim Jiyoung and explores gender inequality, misogyny, and sexism through all the phases of her life. I thought it was a really powerful portrayal of the experiences of women in Korea and in the world in general. The writing is beautiful and simple, and it opens up some very important conversations. One of my 5-star reads this year. The next book I read was The Secret Garden, my first classic read of the year. I was really looking forward to this one, and in a way it's a lovely story about Mary, this 10-year-old girl who moves to live with her uncle in her search for the secret garden, but I did not enjoy it. It was not only very slow-paced, it was also just very racist, and so I couldn't get myself to enjoy this one. Then I read If I Had Your Face. This was one of my favorites this year. This debut novel follows 5 women as they are trying to navigate their lives in Seoul. It touches on different themes of Korean contemporary culture, including beauty standards and plastic surgery, K-pop obsessions, room salons, social hierarchies. I thought it was really well written. All the characters' voices really came through, and also just an interesting look into current Korean contemporary society, of which I didn't really know much. Next, I read Honor by Elif Shafak. Both the writing and the story were so beautiful. It has you reflect on the meaning of life and religion and human existence, which is really wonderful. The story follows twin sisters who were born in a Kurdish village, and while one of them stays there throughout her life as a midwife, the other twin moves to London with her husband, and so we watch as their lives, misunderstandings, family dynamics, love, and loss unfold. After that, I read Song of Achilles, a booktube favorite, and I was not disappointed. I was worried that since I'm not really into mythology, this wasn't going to be for me, but I actually really enjoyed it. It's an adaptation of the Iliad and follows the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus from when they meet to the end of the Trojan War. It's beautiful writing, beautiful descriptions of love and feelings. It's also absolutely heartbreaking. And now that I'm recalling it, I should really get to reading Circe this year. Next, I read Skim, a graphic novel by Mariko and Gillian Tamaki. It's a coming-of-age story that is witty and quirky, but at the same time touches on some really serious topics such as self-image, toxic friendships, racism, identity, etc. I love the mix of dialogue, diary entries, and beautiful illustrations that gave this mysterious vibe at times. Next, I listened to the audiobook for A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the story. It's funny and ridiculous, but a really enjoyable reading experience. I don't think I'll read the full series, but I enjoyed this one. It follows the adventures of Arthur Dent, the last man surviving demolition of Earth. He was rescued by an extraterrestrial being who got trapped on Earth, and so now they explore the galaxy together. It's full of amazing one-liners and just fun to read, so give it a go if you need a pick-me-up. Then I read Six of Crows, my first book in the Grishaverse. I'm not sure why I have put off reading the rest of the books, because I actually really enjoyed it, but I think there were just so many books I wanted to read after my reading slump that I just got a little overwhelmed, and so I never got around to Crooked Kingdom. But I will definitely, guaranteed, read the Six of Crows duology and probably also the Shadow and Bone trilogy this year, so stay tuned for that. Next, I read Will Grayson, Will Grayson. For me, there is nothing more comforting than the John Green and David Levithan combo. The story is written from the perspective of two boys, Will Grayson and Will Grayson, but it's really about Tiny Cooper, one of the most memorable characters I've ever read about. It's witty and refreshing and sometimes a bit cringy and offensive, but in a good way somehow. Then I read Conversations with Friends, and that's when I realized that while her books make me feel pretty awful, they are really well done. I thought I would not want to read another book that just makes me have this lump in my throat the whole time and feel frustrated about how communication or a lack thereof can really ruin so many good things. But at the end of the day, we're all guilty on some level of these things, and so I recently got a copy of her new book as a present, so I'm worried but excited to read that one. So more on that in a couple of months. The Secret Lives of People in Love is a selection of short stories set in Kentucky, New York, Paris, Rome, and Greece. I thought the prose was really elegant and it touches on themes of love, loss, and loneliness. I really loved some of the stories. I think my favorites were Little Birds and Apples, but others didn't move me at all, and I had some issues with the language used in some of them. So overall, it kind of evened out into a middle ranking read. I might check out his other collection at some point. Then I read Wakenhyrst, which is an Edwardian Gothic novel. The book was not quite for me. It was very slow-paced and actually not scary at all. I thought I would like it because it had aspects of religion and superstition and folklore, and I enjoyed the blurred lines between what was real and what wasn't. As a concept, I liked it, but to be honest, I was a little bored, so a bit of a disappointing read. They Both Die at the End is set in a fictional 2017 where there is a service called Deathcast, which calls you on the day that you will die. It was an enjoyable read, but I think I was expecting a little bit more in terms of emotion and depth. The story was good, but I didn't quite feel it. There's this disappointment that I feel, but I can't really explain. But that being said, I would still recommend reading it. It reads really easily and it's enjoyable. The death of Vivek Oji was such a memorable read. It is packed with moving moments as Vivek's loved ones deal with grief, guilt, regret, and every other possible emotion that comes with losing someone you love. I was particularly captured with the mom's journey and her recollections of the time she spent with her son. Absolutely beautiful writing, memorable characters, heartwarming and heartbreaking moments, so definitely would recommend. Next, I read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I'm sure you've heard all about this one, so at the risk of being repetitive, it is a great book. The lyrical writing, the raw feelings it manages to portray, it's absolutely stunning. It's a very moving book. The story is a letter written from a son to his mother, and it talks about their relationship, but also wider society issues such as class and race and coming to terms with your identity. There's no way I can convey what the reading experience is like, so I would suggest you give it a try. I'm currently reading his poetry collection, which is just as stunning, and I can't wait to read more of his work. The Perks of Being a Wallflower, one of my old favorites, a coming-of-age story that follows Charlie through his first year of high school. I still think this is a great piece of YA, and I particularly appreciate how well it describes friendship and showing up for someone even when you don't understand what they are going through. So can't wait to reread this in another 5 or 10 years. Looking for Alaska had a slow start. I wasn't quite convinced, but it picked up around halfway through. I don't want to give away too much of the plot other than the main character is Miles, and he leaves his seemingly dull life at home for boarding school where he meets new friends, including the definitely not so dull Alaska, and they of course go on to many adventures and misadventures. I appreciated the deeper meanings in the topics it touched on in quite the brutal way. This book has many trigger warnings, so do take care if you decide to read it. Not my favorite John Green, but an enjoyable read nonetheless. The Little Prince, a children's book that I completely missed out on when I was younger. It was a nice read. The story is thoughtful and so full of heartwarming messages. It's heartbreaking and comforting at the same time. And maybe I'm too excited about this because I never read it as a child, but maybe it feels more groundbreaking to me than it actually is, but I think it's definitely a cute and nice story. Next, I read The Things They Don't Teach You in School, a poetry collection, which is another old favorite of mine. It got me into poetry for the first time about 7 years ago, and so it was very nostalgic rereading this. Then I read Mrs. Dalloway, a classic that I already know I will need to reread sometime. Every sentence is so precisely crafted and filled with meaning, and I just feel like I definitely didn't get everything out of it just yet. But it's beautifully written, so I want to reread it sometime. But for now, I'll say that I'm just fascinated by the way Virginia Woolf looks at her surroundings and people and life. The House in the Cerulean Sea. This book is very much like a Pixar movie that will tug on your heartstrings gently with heartwarming moments and eventually make you cry softly with a smile on your face as it gently breaks your heart and then patches it back up. It's a beautiful book with a hopeful message and so much warmth. I've talked about this book quite a bit, so I don't want to sound repetitive, but despite its inherent issues, I haven't been able to stop thinking about this book and have recommended it to so many people. I think it's the perfect book to get you out of a reading slump. Next, I read Such a Fun Age, which was a compelling read that I binged in just a few sittings. The book read in a way that made you feel like you were right there in the moment with the characters, which was great for the most part, but it also meant that the secondhand embarrassment also felt very real. Definitely recommend reading this book. I thought it did this really interesting thing where it shows you all these perspectives that really make you understand how, in a lot of scenarios, every one thinks that they're doing the right thing, and even though they might agree with each other on the larger level, it ends up becoming full of misconceptions and miscommunication. I don't think that was a clear description at all, so I'm very sorry about that, but I would recommend reading it if you enjoy contemporary fiction. The Midnight Library, a cozy comfort read with a beautiful message of hope, self-acceptance, and self-worth. It did feel a bit cliche at times, and it wasn't as memorable as I thought it would be, but it's definitely still worth the read. It reads really easily and it's enjoyable. Some trigger warnings though, so make sure to read up on it before you start in case this might not be the time for you. Me and White Supremacy was the first nonfiction I read in 2021. It explores the question of how to recognize your privilege and how to combat racism. I thought it was a really useful book. It takes time to get through because it is set up in such a way that you actively reflect and journal about prompts to help you better understand your privilege, your prejudices, and it helps you to understand how you can make a difference. In that same month, I also finished the only other nonfiction, which was Healing from Hate. The book explores how young men get into and out of violent extremism through some academic literature and then a ton of case studies. Next, I read Piranesi, which is another 2021 favorite. I have recommended this book to so many people, and everyone who took me up on it has enjoyed it also. The story follows Piranesi, who has lived in the house for as long as he can remember. The only other person there and himself are in search of a great knowledge, and we follow Piranesi as he diligently documents their search and his everyday life. It took me a little while to get into because at the beginning it is a bit slow and I wasn't sure where it was going, but once it picked up, I really started admiring the world building that Susanna Clarke managed to put into such a short book. It's really intriguing, has lots of layers, great writing. It's unlike anything I've ever read before. So if you're up for some magical realism and are looking for something a little different, definitely recommend this one. The Seven Sisters is the first in the 7 Ps series. This was gifted to me by my grandma, and so I am slowly making my way through the series. It's historical romance fiction, and in this first book you get introduced to Pa Salt and the 6 girls he adopted around the world and then brought home to Switzerland. The first book explores the story of the eldest sister as she goes to Rio to find out more about her biological roots. It's definitely a bit cliche at times, and so not 100% my thing. But that being said, it's enjoyable for some light reading, and I am intrigued by the different mysteries in the book. Next, I read Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. Beautiful storytelling through a mystery and the exploration of family dynamics. Not quite the page turner that I was expecting, but I did really enjoy just taking my time reading the deep dive that this book takes us into identity and the individual, family, surroundings, and how they are all shaped and interconnected. Then I read Convenience Store Woman, which on the surface is a quirky slice-of-life book about a 30-something woman working at a convenience store, but has the underlying social commentary talking about social expectations, conformity, victimization. It's pretty dark, but it's packaged in this seemingly light and airy little book. Ace of Spades was another favorite of 2021. I could not put this book down. It was really great. When I heard that it was Gossip Girl meets Get Out, I was not sure what to expect, but turns out that that was exactly what it was. It's high school drama and legacy kids meets weird plots and racism, and it works really well. Definitely would recommend this to anyone who enjoys YA. I cannot wait until Farida Abike-Imide comes out with something new. I am eagerly waiting for whatever she writes next. Nijigahara Holograph. I'm still not sure what happened. I definitely did not understand this manga. What I will say is that It is really dark and has just about all the trigger warnings that you can get, so do take care if you try to read this. Then I listened to the audiobook for Matilda, a favorite for as long as I can remember. This book was all the rage when I was young. It's really nostalgic listening to this. To me, it's definitely a children's classic and the ultimate comfort read. Then I read An Abundance of Catherines. The story is about Colin, a child genius who loves anagramming, who dated 19 girls named Catherine and got dumped by all of them, and has the goal of coming up with a formula that predicts people's relationships. I didn't get attached to any of the characters. The humor wasn't quite for me, and just overall a bit disappointing. Behind Closed Doors is a domestic thriller that follows Jack and Grace, who appear to be the perfect couple. Inseparable, wealthy, beautiful. It was a very suspenseful read, and so I read it quite fast, but I don't think the genre is really for me, and I didn't quite enjoy the whole naive woman falls for bad man trope. So a page turner and intriguing, but would probably not read this again. Then I read Storm Sister, the second book of the Seven Sisters series. Very similar format to the first one. We follow the second oldest sister as she discovers her roots, and it takes us to Norway and Germany. Similar thoughts as with the first one, just really nice light reading. Finally, I read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I thought it would be nice to end the year with a comfort read, and Harry Potter will probably always be that for me. I love reading the first one in particular, and I really enjoyed doing the Harry Potter lettering and doodling. So I hope you enjoy this format of me just lettering and doodling. Let me know what you think and if you want to see more of this kind of content. So this is what the whole spread looked like. I hope you enjoyed watching, and see you next time.